The day started off exactly like any other day in their lives. There was nothing at all to indicate that today would be any different, that it would be a day to go down in every human on the planet's memory, down in history, as one of those where everyone remembered where they were when they first heard the news, like 9/11, the assassinations of JFK, Princess Diana and John Lennon. Just a day like any other day, until, in the middle of the broadcast of Survivor, the emergency broadcast system cut in and started giving off a high-pitched alert sound and a standby for instructions. The "this is not a drill" message displayed across the screen, and a robotic woman's voice asking for everyone within earshot to gather round to their television screens. Beth set down her coffee cup and picked up the remote, muting it as she called out to her roommates. "Susanna? Doug?" "I'm hearing it," Doug said in his dry tone as he plopped down on the couch, shoving a Cliff Bar in his mouth. Susanna soon followed, still towel-drying her auburn hair. "What's going on? I really hope it's not another 9/1. She stopped abruptly as the news reporter came onto the screen, looking very sober. "I bet the president's been assassinated," Doug murmured, concern covering his face and filling his close-set hazel eyes as he leaned in toward the TV. Both Beth and Susanna held their breath as the reporter slowly spoke. "In just a moment we will be going live to the White House for a message from the president. I'm not certain what it is that we are going to be told, but I've been informed that it is rather serious, and that all of our viewers who are in their homes should now get up and calmly lock all your doors and windows. If you are in a vehicle, pull over and get inside the nearest safe building. If you are at work, stay where you are. All managers should lock the doors and windows and pull emergency shutters down over them if you have them." The three roommates all looked at each other with puzzled faces, none of them moving for a moment due to the sheer unreality of what they had just heard. The reporter began repeating what he had just said a second time. "What is this about?" Beth thought to herself, standing stationary like a statue of a Greek goddess, blonde hair twirled in ringlets around her introspective diamond-shaped face. Doug felt the desire to get up and take her in his arms and give her a big hug and just hold her, keep holding her against whatever news fell around their ears of whatever nuclear or cosmic calamity they were about to spend the next hours or possibly the rest of their lives dealing with, holed up together in this spacious three-bedroom apartment on the first floor of a rustically charming house on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. But instead he said, "I'll go," as he got up and immediately started locking any windows that weren't already locked. "The newsman," announced the president, and the screen cut to him standing behind a podium in front of the White House, with military generals behind and to either side of him. "Ah, shit," Susanna breathed, sitting in an oversized chair as she pulled her hair into a ponytail on top of her head. Beth stayed standing as Doug raced, breathless, back into the room and set an object on the counter. "What the fuck is that?" Beth asked. "My granddad's grenade," he said offhand, matter-of-factly. Beth could never tell if he were joking or serious, and so it was impossible to know if that thing were real or a toy prop. "Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of the United States, on this day it is my greatest duty as President of your country to inform you of all what I now know. It is with a heavy heart that I do so. We are up against the greatest challenge, not just of our nation, but that of our entire global community, and the lives of every person on this planet are inexorably linked together in this great challenge, a challenge which has befallen not just the United States, but is affecting all of the countries around the world that we are currently aware of." Everyone in the room waited in silence as the president continued. "I speak to you now, not only as acting president, but as ambassador to the United Nations, and this broadcast is going live to our friends and allies in Great Britain, France, and all allied countries, as well as Russia, China, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Africa, and all the countries of the world." "What in the holy good—" Doug could hardly contain himself. "Shh!" Susanna chimed. "Show yourself," he quickly uttered. "He sounds like it's the end of the world." The president continued to speak as little boxes began filling the edges of the screen, forming a border around him as he spoke. In them were the Prime Minister, Kings, queens, and princes. It looked like even sultans were appearing one by one around the edges of the screen. The leader of Russia, China, the biggest political faces on the planet were all on the TV as the UN ambassador/US president continued. I ask that you all now secure your living space and shelter in place if you are not at home if you haven't already done so. There is no politically correct way to say this, so I am just going to talk to you all not as a politician, but as a fellow brother to you all. And I will put this into as plain language as I can, because there is no other way to do this. He opened his hands in a gesture of openness and said, we are not alone here on this planet. Now, we all know that we aren't the only species here, and we live predominantly in harmony with the animal kingdom. And I think that everyone would agree that aside from coming up against a lion in Africa or a shark while swimming out at sea, that we, he waved his hands again, that humans are at the top of the food chain on Earth. E.T., Susanna wailed and Doug shuddered. No. This can't be happening, he thought. Beth was thinking something similar. She was thinking that this felt like a dream and she was hoping she would wake up from it. She even pinched the inside of her forearm as the ambassador kept speaking. But we are not alone, he reiterated. At 0900 hours this morning, the first report started coming in of tall, hair-covered, ape-like creatures attacking small villages in Africa and Cambodia, Thailand. Then the reports started coming in from rural areas of France, Italy, Poland. Our neighbors in the Middle East and Far East have not been spared from the attacks. We have been organizing militarily and are doing surveillance to find the originating areas where they are coming from. What we have discovered is that these Yeti have been living underground, underneath mountains and in caves. We don't yet know the full extent of their numbers, but as of now we do know that they number in the millions. And they have now started swarming towards cities all over the globe in rural areas. He opened his hands again, and with a look of defeat he said, in rural areas, the human casualty count is severe. The attacks were not something we foresaw. We weren't prepared for worldwide attacks of this nature. The enemy has the ability to blend into its surroundings, making it hard to detect. The creatures are fast, making them hard to target, and they are very large, making them a formidable opponent. They aren't easily brought down with bullets. Their hide seems to be extremely thick. Folks, he said with a look of supplication, I'll be honest with you. We've been fighting these things all day, and we still don't have one to bring in for study, research, dead or alive. Our anthropologists and scientists are working on an effective way to stop them, but until that happens, we ask that for your own safety, you remain indoors with doors and windows locked, and any additional security precautions put into action. A loud clang outside made the three roommates jolt as if they'd all just been tased, and the woman ran to the center of the room, not knowing where to go, but not wanting to go in the direction of any of the windows. Doug did the opposite, immediately going for the window he thought was closest to the sound, and turning, motioned with his finger for one of the girls to turn off the lights. Then he peered out into the darkness, scanning the pitch-black yard and tree line for any sign of movement from the TV. A military general was now giving instructions to the public. If you see one, get away from it. You cannot fight these things and win. Another clang, followed by a whooping noise like a chimpanzee at a zoo, this coming from behind the tree line, but much, much louder. Now an anthropologist was giving information. The ones that you see at about 7 feet tall are scouts. They're adolescents. The male of the species that we are connecting with prior Bigfoot and Sasquatch sightings are the ones who follow. You usually won't see them coming, as they are superior hunters. They stand at 12 to 18 feet tall. What? Beth shrieked as the whooping got louder and became multi-directional. A rock struck the window Doug was staring out of. What we do know is that the ones attacking are males, extremely aggressive towards all human men and towards women past reproductive age. They are strategically killing all the men and abducting younger women and children of both sexes. Ooh, 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 ooh. Doug had moved away from the window and went to a more concealed one as he thought of Christopher Lambert in Tarzan Legend of Greystoke. The silverback gorillas whooping out in the deep jungles of Borneo. But these were much, much larger than gorillas, and he knew by the sound of them that they were in deep trouble. Hopefully they don't know how to get inside houses, he thought. The girls were both now quietly crying. If they get in, we run, Beth whispered to Susanna. You hear me? We run. Susanna looked up through tear-filled lashes and nodded. Thermal imaging shows the nests of the Yeti under mountains are filled with just the women and children of the species, but there seems to be very few of them compared to the male warriors. Males appear to outnumber females on a scale of about 100 to 1. A rain of glass as a large hairy rock smashed through the window, pummeling Doug's face as he fell backward into an unconscious heap on the floor. But it wasn't a rock. It was a massively huge, fur-covered hand. Another window smashed. The girls crouched in terror as the walls of the house started shaking, with massive blows coming from all directions, even from above. Shivering and in shock, Susanna was wide-eyed and gibbering incoherently. Remember what I said, Beth said to her, covering her face in her hands. As soon as there's an opening, you run. Don't wait for me. Just run as fast as you can. Do you hear me? Are you listening? Appear to be abducting humans for mating purposes. Survival of the fittest is apparently in effect, as we learned from Darwin. A loud crash of splintering wood as the side of the house came off. Beth stared up at what was in front of her, at what was just not possible. 2 Bigfoot larger than she had ever imagined a Bigfoot could ever in her wildest imaginings be. Standing 14 or 15 feet tall, chests moving up and down, heaving with their deep guttural breaths, which stank of old meat and sulfur. Their hair was long, thick, and matted, and she could see insects like lice or something teeming throughout it, causing their fur to move as though wind were softly blowing through it. Their eyes were dark and devoid of any sense of compassion or empathy. They looked completely animalistic and almost reptilian in their lack of emotion, or shark-like. But the worst thing, Beth noticed to her utter horror, was her thought interrupted now, and one of the beasts whips its hand out lightning fast and grabs the near-convulsing Susanna by the hair. Beth saw her body jerk with the violence of it as she was quickly dragged off, leaving a trail of urine behind her. A numb horror set in as Beth stared up at the lone foul creature with heaving chest, excited from the hunt. Its arousal now blatantly, horribly evident. She cringed, expecting to be hair-dragged at any moment, but instead the Bigfoot lowered itself to its hands and knees and began crawling toward her, its intention dangling nearly to the ground as it tried to position itself as it backed her up inside the shattered shell of a house until she couldn't scoot away any further. Reality set in as she realized her life was likely about to end within the next few torturous minutes of pure horror, so she began to shake uncontrollably, teeth chattering together as she turned her head away from the thing who was almost on top of her. She could feel its putrefied fur brushing her leg. Her eyes were clenched tightly closed when she heard a whisper in front of her face. "Hey!" She opened them to see Doug, 2 feet away from her, laying on the ground, blood soaking his face and hair. He had his grandfather's grenade in his hand. When they made eye contact, she saw his well up with tears, but he gave her a small smile. So much left unsaid, he was thinking. There was time for nothing else, and so she just smiled back and nodded at him as he squeezed his eyes shut and pulled the pin.